Well, yesterday was a big day around here because today we were getting spray foam in my bus, and that means it was our last opportunity to put anything in the walls that we wanted to have in the walls. So that meant we were busy running all of the wiring. Wiring your school bus can be an intimidating process, but I'm here today to make sure that it isn't for you by showing you the materials, the methods, and the tools you'll need to do the job right so you have power everywhere you need it and hopefully nowhere you don't. Don't go anywhere. This week's video is going to be a really informative one for anybody converting a school bus themselves. My name's Chuck Cassidy. Let's get started. Before I get started showing you what we've been up to in the bus, I thought I would take a moment and first start by going over the materials we use when we're roughing in the electrical in a skoolie. The materials you pick obviously play a big role in the overall quality of the finished product. And these are the things that we've figured out over the years that work the best with our methods to deliver longevity, ease of installation, and just an overall feel-good quality product. Let's go ahead and start with the wires that we use when we are doing the bus. It's obviously probably the most important material you'll choose, and that's why we use Anchor brand marine grade wires. Now, marine grade wires are always going to be stranded wires, whereas something like Romex is a solid copper core wire. These are stranded, and as you can imagine, that means there's tons of little strands of wire that make up the conductor. Additionally, those strands are tinned to make them corrosion resistant. Copper oxidizes easily, and as you can imagine out there in the corrosive marine environment, that copper is going to oxidize, and an oxidized connection or conductor generates resistance, which creates heat, which can lead to fires and problems down the road. So we stick with the Anchor stuff. It is more expensive, but because the bus is relatively small, and because fires are so scary, in my opinion, it is worth it. Now, stranded conductors do carry with them some of their own finicky things that you have to pay attention to. And the most important one is that if you're installing a stranded conductor into a terminal that's a clamp terminal, you really ought to consider putting a ferrule on the end of it. And a ferrule is a metal sleeve that goes around it that actually turns that stranded conductor into what is essentially a solid one so the clamp can more easily grab it. I'll be getting more into that on the video I make when I actually hook up everything in the bus, but for now, that's what you should know. We get this Anchor marine wire in a variety of sizes and configurations. The most common size that we are using for our AC side of things is going to be this Anchor 12-3, and that means it has 3 conductors in the sheath, and those 3 conductors are all 12 gauge. That gives us a circuit ampacity of about 20 amps, which is standard for all of our AC circuits. And I like that because if you just run the 12-3 for all of your AC outlets, you'll know you'll have 20 amps at every receptacle if you need it. That's enough to run most mini splits, any appliances. Now, if you want, you can go with 14-3, which would be 3 conductors at 14 gauge. That would be fine for 15 amp circuits, but for us, we like to just keep it simple and stick with the 12-3. Now, there are other types of conductors we use on the AC side. We usually use 10-3, and that's for our shore power inlet coming in. 10-3 has an ampacity of 30 amps. It's actually higher for the Anchor stuff, but in general, it's going to be a 30 amp ampacity, and that's good for a 30 amp shore power. That comes in and hooks up to the inverter. And then coming out of the inverter, depending on the specs of your inverter, you'll need to have either some more 10-3 or maybe some 8-3 or some 6-3, depending on the output rating of your inverter. This bus here will be capable of putting out almost 50 amps of AC power, and so I'll be using Anchor 8-3, and Anchor 8-3 actually has ampacity above 50 amps. So we'll be able to use that coming out of there. If you're not familiar with these terms, ampacity and wire gauges, go check out some videos on the internet. People go into great detail that I don't have time for this morning to explain, but maybe in the future I will. Moving over to the DC side of things, that's where we really get into a lot of size options for our wire. Now, all DC systems generally only use 2 conductors, so instead of something being 10-3 or 8-3, it's going to be 10-2 or 8-2 or 12-2. And because DC systems operate at a much lower voltage, that means you have to pay a lot more attention to a phenomenon called voltage drop. Now, voltage drop is something that occurs when you have a conductor, a wire, covering a relatively large distance at a relatively low voltage, but it can happen at any voltage, and the more current or the more load you put on that wire, the more the voltage is going to drop due to the internal resistance of that conductor. It really comes into effect on 12-volt systems, which, as you can imagine, most of the wiring in this bus is a 12-volt system. That's why we use a voltage drop calculator, which you can either go learn the formula yourself or use a handy online calculator tool that will just tell you what size conductor you need to use, and it will give you the result you need. In general, we're looking for a 5% voltage drop or less on non-critical loads, and then on critical loads, things that are very important to be functioning properly, we look for 3% or less voltage drop. So because of that, that means we find ourselves stocking many sizes of duplex or 2-conductor DC cable. So here I've got everything from 6-2, which is my main solar input coming off the roof, all the way up to 18-2, which is tiny, running to individual light fixtures within the bus. You might not need that big of a range, and I think most folks would be fine for something ranging from maybe 10-2 or 12-2 up to 16-2. But for us, because we do so much of this, we really like to have all of these sizes on hand. The last type of DC conductor I want to talk about is this trailer wire here. This is a 7-conductor wire or cable, and it's got 7 conductors in it. We use that to replace the main wire bundle that goes from the front of the bus to the back of the bus for operating all of the tail lights. I really like just starting over with a fresh bundle of wires because you know it's not going to give you any trouble. Everything's right there, and this takes up a lot less space in your walls than that big mess of wires that I'm sure you've all seen when you've got your school bus. The next type of wiring and conductor I want to talk about are going to be your data lines, your camera wires, and anything that I didn't just cover. So in my bus, I have a set of 4 backup cameras, well, 2 backup cameras and 2 side cameras. And so we want to make sure that we get these in the wall before the spray foam goes in. And these are the wires that carry the camera signal. Additionally, I've got my Victron components in the back that will be communicating to a Servo GX, and that transmits to a touch display. And that touch display needs to have some HDMI and USB extenders running from the location of my system equipment up to where the touch display is, because it only comes with a 6-foot cable stock. So I'm extending that so I can have the display where I want it. Lastly, because I have a shunt in the back that's also going to be communicating with a gauge in my dash to tell me what my electrical system is doing while I'm driving, I've got an Ethernet cable. And then your system might also need the addition of some other miscellaneous networking cables. This is a VE Direct cable that a lot of Victron equipment uses that you might find yourself in need of as you're wiring your bus. Moving on, let's talk about the junction boxes and terminals and places where these wires end up and how we affix them to the structure of the bus itself. Over the years, we've tried a lot of different box options, and this is what we've landed on as our favorite. This is a blue box, and you have different style mud rings that you can attach to the face of the box, whether you would like this box to be a duplex outlet or a single outlet. And what I like about these, they're cheap, they're easy to use. The same box gives you multiple faceplate options, and they're not super deep. They're deep enough for just about everything we're doing in a bus because we're not doing a lot of complicated switches and things like that. And they work great for AC and DC circuits. In the past, we used to not use boxes for our DC circuits, but we decided it was worth the extra space in the wall cavity for our wire runs to use boxes for all of our circuits. So we use these for AC and DC circuits. Now they do make dedicated low voltage kind of mud rings that you can install on your walls, and we used to use these, but since we do spray foam and the foam has a tendency to go everywhere that you don't block it out of, we no longer use these. Now these are some deep new work boxes, and these might look out of place in a skoolie, but we actually really like these for putting behind the walls like this, facing out anywhere that we have a penetration through to the outside for say your shore power inlet or outdoor receptacles or things like that. This is a great way to contain that AC power or DC power and keep your foam and insulation out of it. The last box I want to talk about is this outdoor box. And this is a watertight outdoor box. It's metal, and I actually will be using this on the outside to get power from inside my bus to outside my bus into some liquid tight fittings so I can get power to and from the outdoor section of my mini split. Also on the outside of the bus, we've got to get our solar power into the inside. And I like to use these solar entry glands. They're pretty affordable, and they've got a watertight nut on the outside that you can put your MC cable into coming off your solar panels. And this gives you a nice ceiling flange so that you can get from the roof of your bus or wherever inside your bus with a watertight connection. It's going to look professional, it's going to hold up, and it's going to be really robust. When it comes to getting your shore power in, I'm a big fan of these Marine Co. stainless steel power inlets. I really like these over the plastic ones. The plastic, in my experience, has a tendency to get brittle over time, and it just doesn't look as nice, you know? It's, to me, worth the extra money to get the stainless steel Marine versions. These will hold up really well. These also have locking connectors on them so that when you plug in, you can lock the ring on it and you know it's not gonna pull out. That's a really nice feature. And then last, for our outdoor outlets, because it's important to me if I've got all this power inside to be able to use the power outside, say if we're running tools, lights, or the boom box if we're having a good time. I like to use these. They seem to be the best that I could find. These are 15 amp outdoor receptacles, and they have a really robust weather sealing plug that goes on into them, and it actually physically inserts into a little channel around the outlet to really make it watertight. On the subject of boxes and distribution, let's talk about what we use for AC distribution. And a lot of people have different ways. This is simply the way I prefer to do it, and that is to use a dedicated residential style AC panel. Now there are a lot of RV oriented all-in-one AC DC distribution boxes, and on a smaller project that's a great fit. It's nice to have your AC and your DC in one place. In bigger buses and in my bus or buses with lots of circuits, I prefer to have the AC stuff be completely standalone, and then I actually end up doing multiple DC fuse blocks. Like in my bus, I'll have a DC fuse block at the back, and I'll have one at the front, and that comes back to, again, what I was saying earlier about voltage drop and wire runs. My goal all the time when I'm wiring a bus is to minimize the length of my conductors, especially on the 12 volt side, so that I can keep voltage drop and the wire size changes I have to make to accommodate voltage drop to a minimum. I'm trying to run the smallest wires I can all the time. I'm trying to keep the runs as short as I can all the time. And because of that, I often find myself using multiple DC distribution points. And because my bus will have a 24 volt battery bank, that means I can actually send the 24 volts on the long distance out to where the fuse block is, and right there, do my step down to 12 volts and power the fuse block right there. That's gonna minimize my conductor sizing everywhere. It's gonna minimize voltage drop. And it's gonna overall make the wire runs a lot cleaner because I'm not gonna have as many conductors in the wall. So because of that, I don't do the all-in-one AC DC distribution boxes, but they are a great option on a small project, or if you're just okay with having more conductors in your walls and having to size up on your conductors to make sure that you have the appropriate voltage drop or lack thereof, it's a great option. But for us, we stick with this. I like the Homeline series. You know, pick your favorite flavor. They're all gonna be UL listed and really good options, but I like the Homeline stuff. I'm a big fan of these Tex lath screws. These lath screws are great for attaching your boxes to your framing because they have a nice wide head on them that grips the plastic well and distributes the clamping force over a large area. Big fan of those. And of course, on your boxes, you've got to have strain relief. And so I'm always using these. These are basically Romex clamps that go inside the knockouts of the blue boxes, and then they clamp on the wires so that as you're pulling your wires and whatever, you're not putting any strain on the wires and pulling them out of the boxes. And once things are installed, it keeps that strain from ever getting to the actual electrical connections and terminals themselves. When it comes to securing wires along the way, you cannot go wrong with zip ties. Zip ties are an amazing option. I'm also a big fan of these 3M little foam double-sided tape backed stickers that have a little hole through them that you can actually put a zip tie through for securing walls out in the open field. And for us, Another thing we really use a lot of is Gorilla Tape. And I know a lot of you are like, oh my God, why? You know, that doesn't seem professional. But the truth is, because I will be spray foaming this bus, all I have to do is hold the wires in place long enough for the spray foam to get sprayed in and cure around them. Once the foam cures, those wires aren't going anywhere, and this is more than adequate. It's cost effective and it's very fast. So I'm a big fan of this. Of course, along the wire runs, that means you might have the opportunities for chafe to become an issue, and chafing is a #1 killer of electrical systems and cause of problems in these mobile electrical setups. And so I always have a selection of split loom on hand. Split loom is an incredibly useful tool for protecting wires, not only inside the bus, but outside the bus. So you'll definitely want to make sure you have some of this on hand. If your bus is going to have alternator charging, it's very important that you consider how you get power from the alternator to your DC to DC charger or to your battery bank, because especially in today's modern systems, alternator charging can now account for maybe 900 watts of charging, which means high amperage. That high amperage means you're going to also need a large conductor to deliver the power from the alternator to your battery bank. And so here is an example of some 4-gauge wire that I would be using to do that. I like to connect it directly to the alternator whenever possible, because oftentimes the wire coming from the alternator to the battery bank of the vehicle is too small, and you'll get a lot of voltage drop if you really pull a load straight from the batteries. By running your thick gauge wire right off the stud on the alternator, you're going to minimize that voltage drop and any issues that it might cause and run it straight back to your power center. Let's take a look at the tools you'll need for roughing in your bus. And don't worry, because it's pretty simple. You're going to need a good set of wire cutters, a screwdriver, a Sharpie, and a drill and a screw gun. And that's going to be enough to get this whole job done. Well, I think that covers it for everything I want to talk about out here. So let's go inside and I'll show you what a wired, roughed-in school bus looks like, at least the way we do it here at Chrome Yellow. The first thing you'll probably notice in here is that we didn't use conduit anywhere. And this is a subject for debate, and of course you can do you because it's your bus. But for us, over the years, after trying conduit on a bus, we've decided that it just isn't worth it, and most OEM bus manufacturers don't use it either. So we run all of our wiring naked, in a sense, just secured to the wall itself, and it will get encased in spray foam after the fact. If you're going to be using something else for insulation, you might want to consider using conduit, and like I said, everybody does it their own way. The other thing you're going to notice is that these wires appear to be run haphazardly. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we are always trying to minimize the length of our wire runs, and that means a lot of diagonals and a lot of taking the straightest route possible so that we are minimizing the length of the run and therefore the voltage drop incurred on that run, especially if it is a 12 volt or a low voltage DC conductor that we're talking about. Now, throughout the bus you can see all of the blue boxes installed. We've got the strain relief installed, and then you can see that on the wire run itself, we have our tape holding the wires in place. In some cases, we're also using zip ties, and we've also got split loom acting as chafe protection anywhere that we have a wire run that's going over the edge of some metal or something that, despite the fact it will be encased in spray foam, still makes us nervous. Now I'm going to go through and show you our methodology and go over with you the steps that we use to wire in a bus from start to finish. I always prefer to wire in a bus after it's been framed. And then what we'll do is we'll go to every location where we want switches or lights or any type of other fixture that's going to use electricity, and we will mark on the framing what we want in that location. The next thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and install all of our blue boxes at those locations, making notes below them what the feature will be and the gauge of wire that we want to run to it. Now earlier I said for all of our AC runs we use the same wire, so we don't do that for the AC stuff. But then for anything else, say these under cabinet lights, we will go ahead and put the gauge of wire that we want running to it. Some of the most critical placement that you have to pay attention to is going to be all of your DC and networking equipment, where it comes into for your solar system. Also your main AC breaker panel. This has been masked up for spray foam, and the placement of your inverter. You also want to make sure that you get your outdoor outlets and your power inlets installed correctly, because those are locations that not only reference the inside of your bus, but also the outside. This, for example, is my shore power inlet. I've got my 10 gauge wire that has a 30 amp ampacity running out to it, and it's on the driver's side. RV convention is that you want your shore power connections on the driver's side, so we followed that here. On the other side of the bus, these are my outdoor outlet boxes. Because I'm going to be hanging out on the passenger side, I went ahead and installed these over here. The next thing you want to go ahead and locate are your main DC distribution points. Since I'm doing a split DC distribution system, like I said earlier, I've got a front DC fuse block and a rear DC fuse block. And then what I like to do is go ahead and write down all of the circuits that will be serviced by that fuse block. So we did that here, and we also did it on the piece of wood up there. I like to use these pieces of scrap wood with a hole drilled in it to route the wires out of the walls. The spray foamers will go in and fill this whole cavity, and as they're trimming, this prevents their blades from nicking the sides of the wire. So here you can see these are all of our DC circuits that are serviced by what will be a DC distribution panel surface mounted to the wall right here. So where you have these big bundles of all of your circuits coming out, I can't stress how important it is to make sure you go ahead and take that Sharpie and label all of your wires. Your future self will thank you. That trick with the wood scrap with the wires coming out of it is also useful for any other types of wiring that you need sticking out of the wall. Here we have our backup camera wires, and they will get installed later. I like to save some of these penetrations for after spray foam so that the slack will remain. It can be serviceable after the fact. But we need to have these wires run and sticking out of the wall. Well, this will protect them just like with the other wires. If you look on the outside, I've got some exterior lights. Because these will get sprayed in foam, I need to make sure I save a cavity on the inside of that foam for the extra slack to be pushed into. I like to use these plastic hardware containers taped to the wall to create that space. Next to it, this is where my display is going to go for all of my electrical components. So I built a wooden box and ran my networking cables and all of those data lines into this box. And after the fact, when the wall gets in, I'll cut a small hole that my display will cover, but this creates a nice pocket for all of that slack to go. Those wires then run all the way down and they come out where the core of my electrical system will be. Trailer wire I was talking about earlier that runs all of our tail lights runs below the chair rail here to the back wall and then wires in to the tail lights. I really love this trick because it gets rid of that massive bundle and gives you one clean cable all the way back. Wiring the AC outlets is pretty straightforward. In general, we will come off of the breaker panel and then just daisy chain the outlets one after another, occasionally branching them off into 3 where necessary. That's very straightforward. The DC stuff gets a little more interesting. What we generally do is do what we call a home run, which will be the power supply line going all the way back to our distribution point. That brings the power into our switch box, and then the switch box then has the individual wires that go out and feed the fixtures. So this box here has the home run, bringing power in, and then each one of these will connect to a switch in this box that goes to a different light. We've got 3 exterior lights and the dome lights right here. The ceiling lights, again, we use that trick with the scrap wood to have our wires hanging out. This way, spray foam goes in and it won't get cut when they're trimming it with the saws. And you can see here, we've got all of our dome lights wired in, and I've also got a wire drop there for our vent fan. On the outside here, you can see those blue boxes I was telling you about. We put them over the holes, and these will be where our outdoor outlet receptacles go. There's another one down there. And then up here for our outdoor lights, on the back side of those boxes I was showing you, those clear plastic hardware containers, those are the stub outs we have for our outdoor lights. I'm sure some of you are probably freaking out because those wires seem to run everywhere, and if you ever have to drill a hole into the side of your bus, well, how are you going to make sure you don't hit those conductors? Well, around here we pay special attention to our fastener lengths. We know that the finished wall going in this bus everywhere will be at least 1/2 inch plywood, which means as long as we're using fasteners that protrude into that plywood no more than 1/2 inch or 5/8, we won't get into trouble. My last trick for roughing in your bus is to walk through the bus before you start covering up the wires with things like spray foam or wall panels, and do a slow video walkthrough, making sure you get some of every square inch of that bus so that down the road, if you do need to cut a hole in the side for say a vent or something like that, you know exactly where you can drill with confidence. In my opinion, it's worth the trade-off of having wires everywhere to have those wire runs be short and maximized for efficiency. Wow, that was a big download. I hope that the tips and tricks I've given you today give you the confidence you need to feel like you can tackle the wiring project on your skoolie with confidence and hopefully execute it with precision and skill. It's definitely a big job, there's no way around that. Wiring a school bus around here takes about 30 hours, but a little bit of foresight and planning on the front end will make sure you have power exactly where you need it and you don't find yourself in a situation wishing you had run more wires down the road. I can't stress it enough. Go through and make sure you have wires everywhere you need them and maybe throw in even a couple extra. It's not gonna hurt anything. Wire's cheap and it doesn't get any easier than now to put wires in your walls. Well, I think that's gonna do it for me today. The spray foamers will be here any minute. My name's Chuck Cassie. Thank you for watching this. If you like this, make sure you subscribe and we'll see you next time.